She arrived in Cedar Hollow on a Tuesday, with a trunk that did not close all the way and a name that had already been spoken poorly in 3 other towns. Nobody came to meet her at the platform. The station master did not look at her twice, and the wind took the hem of her coat and did not let go of it easily, the way trouble does not let go of a woman once it has decided to follow her. She was Evelyn, and she carried with her a question she had not yet learned to keep quiet. It followed her the way a shadow follows a woman walking alone at dusk, patient and long and unwilling to be shaken. She did not ask for forgiveness for herself. She asked it for someone else, in front of a congregation that had only just learned her name. And she asked it of a preacher who had buried his wife 2 winters before and had not raised his voice since. He said nothing. Not that first time, and not for a long while after. Some men answer with words, and some men answer with wood piles stacked before a woman even asks, with a porch step mended in the dark, with a silence that is not refusal, but a kind of waiting. Nathan Cooper was the second kind of man, and the town did not know what to make of a preacher who withheld an answer the way other men withhold a debt. There is a particular quiet that settles over a valley in the last light of autumn, when the pines stop swaying and the horses go still in the pasture, and it was in that quiet that something between Evelyn and the preacher began to take a shape neither of them named. Not love. Not yet. Something closer to the ground than that. Something that grows the way roots grow, in the dark, before anyone sees the first green thing above the soil. This is the story of a woman who asked a question no one wanted answered, and a man whose silence was not judgment, but a debt he owed his own past. It is a story of a town that watched and whispered, and in the end, learned to look away kindly. It began with a single question asked outside a church door. It did not end there. The wind did not care what town she had come from, only that she was standing in a new one now. And so it went on, pulling at her coat as she walked the length of the platform, toward whatever waited for her next. What waited for her was a boarding house with a crooked sign and a landlady named Mrs. Abernathy, who looked at Evelyn's trunk longer than she looked at Evelyn's face. In the town Evelyn had left, a man named Silas Prentice had promised to marry her, had let the whole county believe it, and had then married another woman 3 counties over, without so much as a letter of explanation. It was Evelyn who had been left standing at a church door in her good dress, and it was Evelyn whose name had since been spoken the way one speaks of spoiled milk. She had not broken the engagement, she had only survived it, and in some towns that was treated as the same offense. Cedar Hollow was smaller than the town she had left, with 1 main road, 1 dry goods store, and a white church that sat at the top of a low rise like it was keeping watch over everything below it. Mrs. Abernathy gave her a room at the back of the boarding house, the one that looked out over the wash line instead of the road, and did not ask what had brought her. She did ask on the second morning whether Evelyn could sew a straight seam, because the church was always in want of hands to mend the linens and the choir robes before the cold set in. Evelyn said that she could. She did not say that sewing was one of the only things left to her that no man had managed to take credit for or blame her for, and Mrs. Abernathy did not ask that either. She met the preacher on a Thursday in the side room of the church where the mending was kept in a cedar chest that smelled of lamp oil and old wool. Nathan Cooper was tall in the way of men who have spent their lives ducking through doorways built for someone smaller, and he moved without hurry, the way a man moves when he is not asking for anything. He did not introduce himself with any flourish. He said his name, and that the chest needed a new latch, and that the choir robes had gone soft at the shoulders from years of wear. And then he left her to the work as though her presence required no further comment from him. Evelyn had expected questions. She had expected, at the very least, the particular kind of politeness that was really just suspicion wearing a clean collar. He gave her neither. The town gave her both. Mrs. Whitfield, who ran the millinery and considered herself the keeper of Cedar Hollow's good sense, made a point of greeting Evelyn from across the road rather than beside it, and made a longer point of asking Mrs. Abernathy, in a voice pitched to Carrie, what exactly a young woman traveled alone for. Word of Silas Prentice had not followed Evelyn to Cedar Hollow in any exact form, but the shape of a scandal does not need its details to arrive intact. It only needs a woman traveling without a husband, a father, or a story anyone finds satisfying, and Cedar Hollow supplied its own version readily enough. Evelyn heard it in the pauses before people spoke to her, and in the way certain doors, which had been open the week before, were now only opened part way. She kept to the mending. She kept to Mrs. Abernathy's kitchen, where she had begun, without being asked, to help with the bread on baking days, working the dough the way her mother had taught her, with the heel of her hand and no wasted motion. Nathan Cooper came by the boarding house twice that first fortnight, once to bring a lamp Mrs. Abernathy had asked to borrow, and once for no reason he stated at all, though he mended the sagging gate latch while he was there, and did not charge for it and did not wait to be thanked. Evelyn watched him from the kitchen window on that second visit, working the latch with the patient, unbothered attention of a man fixing something that was not, strictly speaking, his to fix. It was the way a man works when he has already decided something and simply has not said it aloud yet. The Sunday that changed things came at the end of that same fortnight, cold enough that frost had silvered the church windows from the outside. Evelyn had not planned to speak. She had sat in the back pew, as she had the 2 Sundays before, with her hands folded over a hymnal she barely opened, aware of the particular stillness that surrounded a woman the congregation had not yet decided to forgive for a sin she had not committed. But as the service let out and the townsfolk gathered on the church steps in their coats and their careful conversations, Evelyn found herself standing directly in front of Nathan Cooper, with Mrs. Whitfield near enough to hear, and the question came out of her before she had weighed the cost of asking it in front of anyone at all. "Can you forgive him?" she asked. She did not need to say who. Word travels faster than trains in a town the size of Cedar Hollow, and by then enough of it had reached enough ears that everyone standing on those steps understood she meant Silas Prentice, the man who had left her standing at an altar 2 counties away and gone on to marry someone else without a word of apology to the woman he had wronged. It was not forgiveness for herself she was asking after. She wanted to know whether a man of God could hold a thing like that, could look at a wrong so plain and so unpunished, and still call it forgivable. She wanted, perhaps, permission to stop carrying the anger herself. Nathan Cooper did not answer at once. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he is trying to place, some object turned up out of the ground that he half recognizes and cannot yet name. And the silence that followed stretched long enough that Mrs. Whitfield's eyebrows rose of their own accord, and a hush moved through the small crowd on the steps, like wind through dry grass. He did not look away from Evelyn, and he did not look uncomfortable, only quiet, in the particular way of a man weighing something far older than the question in front of him. Some things are too large for naming, and it seemed, in that moment, that whatever Nathan Cooper was weighing belonged to himself as much as to her. He said nothing at all, not a word of scripture, not a word of comfort, not even her name. He simply held her gaze a moment longer, touched the brim of his hat the way he might have on any ordinary Sunday, and walked on toward the parsonage without hurry, without explanation, and without the faintest air of a man who had refused to answer. The congregation took his silence for judgment and began within the hour to speak of it that way over supper tables across Cedar Hollow. But Evelyn, standing alone on the steps with the cold working its way into her coat, found she was not certain that judgment was what she had seen in his face at all. The cold deepened in the weeks that followed, and with it came a particular quiet that settled over Evelyn's days, a quiet that had nothing to do with the town's judgment and everything to do with waiting. She did not see Nathan Cooper again for the better part of a week after that Sunday, on the church steps. She told herself she had not expected to, and told herself again that it did not matter, though she found her eyes drifting toward the parsonage window each time she carried the mending basket past it. Mrs. Abernathy noticed and said nothing, which was its own kind of kindness in a town that had grown so free with its opinions. The frost came earlier that year than most remembered, and the garden behind the boarding house gave up its last tomatoes before Evelyn had finished putting the rest of the harvest to jars. It was Nathan who came to help with the jarring, though no one had asked him to. He arrived on a Wednesday evening with a crate of canning lids he said Mrs. Abernathy had ordered, though Mrs. Abernathy later admitted, without much shame, that she had ordered no such thing. He stayed to split kindling for the stove, working the hatchet with the same unhurried rhythm he brought to everything, and when Evelyn set a plate for him at supper without asking whether he intended to stay, he did not decline it. He ate quietly, complimented nothing directly, but finished every plate she gave him and returned twice for the biscuits, which was, in a house full of women who noticed such things, its own form of praise. Not a word passed between them about the church steps, or the question she had asked, or the silence he had given in return. The porch step at the boarding house had been loose since before Evelyn arrived, a small complaint Mrs. Abernathy mentioned only in passing one evening while pouring coffee. Nathan fixed it the following morning before the frost had even lifted off the grass, working alone with a bag of nails and a plank he had brought from his own woodpile, and he was gone again before Evelyn came down to see who had done it. She found out only because Mrs. Abernathy told her, watching Evelyn's face carefully as she said it. Evelyn said nothing in response beyond a small nod, but she stood on that step a moment longer than the errand required, testing its new solidity with her weight, the way a woman tests something she is not yet ready to trust completely. The firewood came next, stacked neatly against the boarding house wall on a morning when no one had seen him arrive or leave, cut to a length that fit the stove exactly, which meant he had measured the stove itself at some point without either woman noticing. Evelyn began to understand slowly and without being told that this was simply how Nathan Cooper spoke. He did not say what he meant. He built it, split it, nailed it into place, and left before anyone could thank him properly. And the sum of those small, unspoken labors began to add up to something Evelyn found she could not entirely explain to herself, let alone to Mrs. Abernathy, who asked once, gently, whether the preacher's visits meant what she thought they meant. Evelyn only said that she did not know, and that seemed, for the moment, to be true. Mrs. Whitfield's opinion of the arrangement did not soften with the season. She made a habit of walking past the boarding house on her way to the millinery at an hour calculated to catch sight of whatever comings and goings might be occurring, and she found, more than once, reason to mention to the other women of the church sewing circle that a preacher had no business mending fences for a woman with Evelyn's history, whatever that history precisely was. The sewing circle listened, as sewing circles do, with more attention than comment, but Evelyn felt the weight of it each time she walked past the millinery window and saw Mrs. Whitfield's eyes follow her without any accompanying greeting. Not unkindly, perhaps, but without any warmth either, which in a small town amounted to much the same thing. There were suppers in those weeks that Evelyn would remember longer than she expected to at the time. Nathan took his meals at the boarding house often enough that Mrs. Abernathy stopped asking whether to set a place for him and simply set it, and the three of them settled into an easy, wordless rhythm around the table, the scrape of forks and the pass of a dish standing in for conversation neither of them seemed to need. He asked once how she had learned to bake bread the way she did, and she told him about her mother's kitchen, about the heel of the hand and no wasted motion. And he listened the way a man listens who intends to remember what he has been told. She did not ask him about his wife, though she knew from Mrs. Abernathy that there had been one, and that the ground beneath the small stand of pines behind the church held her now, and that Nathan visited that ground on Sunday evenings after the congregation had gone home. One evening in late autumn, with the light going early and the porch cold enough that their breath showed between them, Evelyn and Nathan sat without speaking for the better part of an hour, she with her mending in her lap and he with his hat resting on his knee, and neither of them moved to end it. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that settles between two people who have run out of the need to fill it, and Evelyn found herself thinking, watching the last light go out of the pines on the ridge, that this silence bore no resemblance at all to the one he had given her on the church steps. That one had been a held breath. This one was closer to rest. She began, in those weeks, to reconsider what she had seen in his face that Sunday. She had taken it, along with the rest of the town, for judgment, or at best for a preacher's careful unwillingness to speak on a matter too delicate for a public step. But watching him now, watching the quiet, deliberate way he moved through her days without once asking anything of her in return, she began to suspect that the silence had not been about her question at all, or about Silas Prentice, or about forgiveness owed to a man 3 counties away. She began to suspect it had been about some private ledger of his own, some account he had not yet settled, and that her question had simply been the first time in a long while that anyone had asked him to open it. She did not press him on it. Some things are too large for naming, and Evelyn had learned, if nothing else in the wreckage of the last year, that a question asked too soon closes more doors than it opens. She let the firewood and the mended latch and the porch steps speak in whatever language Nathan Cooper had chosen for himself, and she found, to her own quiet surprise, that she was beginning to understand it. The winter had not yet fully arrived in Cedar Hollow, but something in her had already begun to settle in for it, the way a woman settles into a house she has not yet decided to call her own, testing the walls, listening for the wind, waiting to see if it would hold. The trouble arrived, as trouble in small towns often does, dressed as a delegation. Mrs. Whitfield came to the parsonage on a Tuesday afternoon with 3 other women from the sewing circle trailing behind her, their bonnets set at the particular angle women wear when they have rehearsed what they intend to say. Nathan received them at the door and did not invite them in, which Evelyn heard about later from Mrs. Abernathy, who had heard it from the baker's wife, who had heard it from one of the women present. Mrs. Whitfield's complaint, when she finally stated it plainly, was that a preacher, lending his hands so freely to a woman of Evelyn's history, reflected poorly on the church, and that propriety demanded he distance himself from her before the whole congregation began to draw conclusions. Nathan listened to the whole of it without interrupting, and when she had finished, he said only that he did not believe the Lord had given him hands to keep idle out of fear of what the neighbors might say, and closed the door with no more heat in his voice than if he had been discussing the weather. The delegation did not take this well, and word of the exchange moved through Cedar Hollow with the particular speed of a story that confirms what people already wanted to believe. Evelyn felt the shift almost immediately in the way the dry goods clerk took longer to count her change, in the way 2 women crossed the road rather than pass her directly outside the church. She said nothing of it to Nathan, not wanting to be the cause of further trouble between him and his congregation. And she took to doing her marketing earlier in the day, before the road filled with people who had opinions about her. Mrs. Abernathy, watching her slip out at dawn with her basket, said only that a woman ought not have to hide from her own town, and Evelyn had no answer for that beyond a tired sort of agreement. It was into this uneasy quiet that Harvey Doyle arrived, on a Thursday, in a coat too fine for Cedar Hollow's dust and a manner too smooth for its taste. He came into the dry goods store asking after a woman named Evelyn Marsh, claiming kinship with the Prentice family, and a debt he said she owed them for damages to Silas's reputation, though what damage a man could suffer from abandoning his own intended went unexplained. He was the kind of man who smiled first and asked questions after, the kind who wanted something cheap and dressed it up as principle. And within the hour, half of Cedar Hollow had heard that a stranger had come asking after the woman staying at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house, which did nothing to improve the opinions already forming against her. Harvey found Evelyn on Saturday in the town square, where she had gone to collect a parcel of thread for the church mending. He approached her in full view of the Saturday market crowd, his voice pitched loud enough to carry, accusing her of having spread lies about Silas Prentice that had cost the family standing and money both, and suggesting, with the particular cruelty of a man who has nothing to lose in being wrong, that a sum of money might settle the matter quietly before he was forced to take it further. The market crowd had gone still around them, the way a crowd does when it senses a story it will repeat for weeks afterward. And Evelyn felt the old shame rise in her throat, the same shame that had followed her out of her last town like a debt she had never actually incurred. She did not have to answer him alone. Nathan Cooper crossed the square without hurry, the way a man moves when he has already decided something and does not intend to discuss it, and came to stand beside her, not in front of her, close enough that his shoulder nearly touched hers but did not. He said nothing to Harvey Doyle for a long moment, only looked at him the way a man looks at something he is trying to place, some low, familiar species of trouble he had seen before in other forms. When he did speak, his voice was no louder than it needed to be, and he said only that Miss Marsh owed no debt to any family that could not produce a signed paper proving it, and that Harvey was welcome to take the matter to the county judge if he believed otherwise, but that the town square was no place for a man to shake down a woman in front of her neighbors. Harvey's smile faltered. He had come prepared for tears or for silence, not for a preacher standing his ground without raising his voice. What settled the matter in the end was not Nathan's words but his hand, which came to rest on the railing of the market stall beside Evelyn's, not over her own hand but beside it, close enough that the gesture could not be mistaken for accident. It was a small thing, and it lasted only a moment, but the market crowd saw it, and Mrs. Whitfield saw it from where she stood outside the millinery, and even Harvey Doyle seemed to understand, in that instant, that he had misjudged the ground he stood on. He gathered what remained of his dignity, muttered something about writing to the family, and left Cedar Hollow on the afternoon stage without collecting whatever he had come to collect. The crowd dispersed slowly, the way a crowd does when it has witnessed something it does not yet know how to discuss, and Evelyn stood a moment longer at the railing, aware of the warmth of Nathan's hand so near her own and the strange steadiness it had lent her. It was little Daniel, the blacksmith's boy, who broke the silence that followed them both back toward the boarding house. He had been sent to fetch a length of rope and had witnessed the whole exchange from the shade of the livery, and he fell into the step beside Evelyn on the road, looking up at her with the plain, unguarded curiosity of a child too young to have learned the town's caution. He asked her without preamble whether she was going to marry the preacher, and when she told him she did not know, he considered this with the seriousness children bring to questions adults have made too complicated, and said that he hoped she would, because his mother said Preacher Cooper had been too quiet since his wife passed, and Evelyn made him laugh. Evelyn had no answer for that either, but something in her chest loosened at the boy's easy certainty, the way ice loosens along a riverbank before anyone has noticed the thaw beginning. Mrs. Whitfield did not apologize in the days that followed, and Evelyn had not expected her to. But the crossing of the road stopped, and the clerk at the dry goods store counted her change at the same speed he counted everyone else's. And the sewing circle, when she brought the mending back to the church the following Sunday, made room for her at the table without comment, which was, in a town like Cedar Hollow, as close to an apology as anyone was likely to get. Some things are too large for naming, and the town's slow softening toward Evelyn was one of them, arriving not in words but in small readjustments of space and silence, the way a room grows warmer once someone has quietly closed the door against the wind. Winter came fully to Cedar Hollow in the weeks after Harvey Doyle left on the afternoon stage, and with it came a stillness that had less to do with the season than with the town's slow, wordless surrender of its old suspicions. Evelyn no longer left for the market at dawn to avoid other people's eyes, and she found, more mornings than not, that the eyes she met on the road held nothing sharper than ordinary curiosity. Mrs. Whitfield still kept her distance, but it had become the ordinary distance of two women who simply did not seek each other out, rather than the deliberate coldness of before. And Evelyn had learned enough of small towns by then to know that this was likely the most peace she would ever be offered on that front. She took it and did not ask for more. It was on a Wednesday evening, with snow already lying thin along the fence rails and the light gone early behind the ridge, that Nathan finally answered the question she had asked him on the church steps so many weeks before. They were sitting on the boarding house porch, as they had taken to doing most evenings by then, Evelyn with her mending, and Nathan with his hat on his knee, and he spoke without any preamble, the way a man speaks when he has been carrying words a long while and has finally decided the weight of keeping them is greater than the weight of saying them. He told her that his silence that Sunday had not been judgment of her or of Silas Prentice, but a reckoning with a debt of his own, a woman he had failed to forgive before she died, a father who had left him young and angry, and whom Nathan had never once, in all the years since, been able to release from blame. He said that when Evelyn asked him whether a man could forgive such a thing, he had heard, underneath her question, an older one he had been asking himself for years and had never answered honestly. His wife, he told her, had asked him once in the last winter of her illness whether he had made his peace with his father before the man died, and Nathan had told her that he had, because it was easier to say than the truth. And she had believed him, and he had carried the lie quietly ever since, the way a man carries a stone in his boot that he has grown almost used to. Evelyn did not interrupt him. She sat with her mending stilled in her lap and let him finish, understanding, in that moment, that his silence on the church steps had never been about withholding forgiveness from her, but about being asked plainly whether he had ever managed to grant it to himself. "I have not made my peace with much of anything," he said, "but I am trying now, and I would not have started trying if you had not asked." It was the longest speech Evelyn had heard him give since she arrived in Cedar Hollow, and she found she had no need to fill the silence that followed it with words of her own. Some things are too large for naming, and what passed between them on that porch belonged to that category, understood more fully in the quiet after his words than it could have been in any reply she might have offered. She reached over after a while and set her hand on the railing beside his, not over it, the way he had done for her in the town square, and he did not move his away. The town's final softening came not in a single moment, but in a gradual accumulation of small permissions, the way a frozen river does not break all at once, but thins first at the edges. Mrs. Abernathy began introducing Evelyn to new arrivals as our Evelyn rather than the young woman staying with me, and the sewing circle, by midwinter, had stopped remarking on her presence at all, which was its own quiet form of acceptance. Even Mrs. Whitfield, encountering Evelyn outside the millinery on a bitter Tuesday morning, offered her a nod that held no warmth exactly, but no judgment either, and Evelyn understood that this small, wordless truce was as close to an apology as the town was ever going to give her, and that it would have to be enough, and that it was. Daniel, the blacksmith's boy, was the one who said aloud what the rest of the town had only begun to allow itself to think. He had taken to following Nathan and Evelyn on their Sunday walks after service, trailing a few steps behind with the easy attachment of a child who has decided, on his own authority, that certain adults belong to him. On a Sunday near the end of that winter, walking between them toward the parsonage where Nathan had begun keeping a second chair at his table without either of them remarking on it, Daniel reached up and took Evelyn's hand, the way children do when the gesture has become habit rather than decision, and called her Mama plainly, without ceremony, as though the word had simply been waiting for the right moment to arrive. Evelyn's step did not falter, but something in her chest did, the good kind of falter, and Nathan's hand found the small of her back for the briefest moment, not holding her, only steadying, the way a man touches something he has decided, at last, he intends to keep. The wind moved through the pines above Cedar Hollow that evening the way it always had, indifferent to the small human reckonings taking place beneath it, and the horses in the parsonage corral stamped and settled against the cold the way they had every winter before this one. The fire in the boarding house hearth burned low and steady, the way it had on the night Evelyn first arrived with a trunk that did not close and a name she had not yet learned to carry lightly. Smoke rose from the church chimney and from the parsonage chimney, both thin gray threads against a darkening sky, and the river at the edge of town moved on beneath its first skin of ice, patient, unbothered, indifferent to whether the people above it had made their peace or not. The world had not paused to notice what had shifted between a preacher and a woman who arrived on a Tuesday. It simply continued, the way it always does, carrying its quiet blessings forward into whatever came next. And that was the story of Evelyn Marsh and Nathan Cooper, a woman who arrived with nothing but a trunk that would not close and a question no one wanted to answer, and left with a home, a son who called her by the name that mattered, and a man whose silence had never been a refusal at all, only the sound of a heart deciding, slowly and honestly, what it could finally allow itself to keep. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this one. Thank you.